On record. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us in this beautiful afternoon here in Ireland. Today's guest is Annika Hurwitt, and her career has spanned, in the politest sense, you know, she has long experience in the world of working with people and working in the area of principles. Her original training would have been how did you describe it? In the sense of descriptive psychology, Annika, was it?
Oh, no. So psychotherapy and then narrative psychology.
Narrative psychology. I couldn't think of the word narrative psychology.
Yeah.
And essentially, in the drive, like I say, to bring as many diverse people with vast experience working with people in all different areas of business and personal and relationships, and as much as I possibly can. This is part of the series, and Annika has pretty much worked on it all, which would be fair to say.
Yes.
So before we go any further, Annika, I'll throw the floor over to you and tell the world about you.
Oh, you want me to introduce myself?
Introduce yourself.
All right. Hello, everybody. So happy to be here. And thank you, Billy, for asking me. Yeah, I've always been fascinated by what makes people tick. So I started by studying creativity and was a journalist, and I would interview authors and writers and painters and have my articles published. And then in my interest to understand people more deeply, I started to study psychotherapy and coach people. And for 10 years, that's what I did. I had focus of women survivors of trauma, which simply came about because, as so often happens, you know, one woman came and she got help, and so she sent others. But I was leaving the field of psychotherapy because I thought there was more to life than helping people cope. I thought life was about thriving and joy and, again, creativity. So I got a doctorate in narrative psychology, and I was studying storytelling, bringing together my two loves of writing and healing. And that was when I was introduced to the three principles. In 1993, George and Linda Pransky and Dick and Bettinger came to Boston, and I went for 4 days, and I had been looking for the link between psychology and spirituality at that point since I was a teenager, because it was obvious to me that people went to spirituality to feel well and experience joy and upliftment and mental calm. And then they went to psychotherapy to figure out their problems. But it just seemed commonsensical to me that the two should be one.
Yeah.
And my master's was in transpersonal psychology, so I can say with full authority that that link did not exist. You know, it's pointed to in Jungian psychology, it's pointed to in positive psychology, it's pointed to in spiritual psychology, but there was no link as far as how you actually worked with people. So when I went to this 4 days, I saw George and Linda and Dickon living that link. I experienced that they were naturally present while they spoke to us. And I knew that I'd found the link that I'd been looking for all those years. And I thought, I'm not going back into working with people because I was pretty much launching as a storyteller at that point. But I want this for myself because I don't want to continue a life where I get stressed and then I meditate to calm down, and then I get stressed and then I go for a walk to calm down. I want what those people have. So I began to study the principles and found the impact was huge, and that my mental stress came way down. And I started living in the present more and more of the time, without doing anything to get there.
Mhm.
And then, of course, after about 9 months, people started saying, Annika, you've really changed. And I want to know, I want to learn what you've learned. So little by little, I started coaching people again. And that was 27 years ago, I think. I've lost count. The thing is, I love what I do so much, I can't stop. I had to choose at one point between the storytelling career and coaching people in the principles. And I chose the principles because one of the reasons stories have such big impact is when you start to tell a story, people settle into the present. So the message that the story conveys hits people between the eyes. And if it's a healing message, it has great impact. But then when they leave the storytelling event or the storytelling one-on-one session, they don't have these principles. So their minds go back to their unconscious stress-producing habits. So I chose this path because of its efficacy, because I thought, which one is going to heal and help more people? Yeah. So I've been teaching the principles ever since. I have a passion for working with women leaders. I think COVID-19 has really shown the world the countries that have done the best under this pandemic have all been run by women. I work with leaders in general. I work with bringing about culture change in organizations. I coach individuals and couples. I train practitioners. I speak at conferences. Basically, you can't get rid of me. I'm just, and people ask me about retirement. I don't really know many people in the 3P field who've been doing this a while like I have, who would retire if they could. Because what are you going to do when you retire? You're going to stop talking about this. So that's a bit about me.
There isn't a retirement plan
No,
with understanding, is there?
right, exactly.
It doesn't come equipped with with a retirement plan because it's a lifelong thing.
Exactly.
It's the unfolding of life.
Well, this is it, Billy. And the thing is, Christine Heath and I joke about this sometimes. Like, we can't go anywhere without somebody asking for help. I mean, more or less, not all the time, thank God, that would be overwhelming. But, it's just these chance encounters that I have outside of my practice and my whole business. It's the woman in the grocery store, the man I meet on a train. I think the more present we become, the more you see humanity and you connect with humanity in so many more places. And that is such a gift. You're able to look people in the eye and see their spirit and connect with their soul. And so these conversations often emerge organically that are very deep, and they're about the principles. So even if I stopped working, I'd still be doing that.
It is the undeniable draw of connection.
Yeah.
It is the undeniable draw of connection. To create a bit of context between, I mean, for me, I understand it clearly, Annika, when sitting beside somebody and there's that conversation just evolves, and I get that, and like you say, you can see what's going on. For those of us that have come across the principles and understand how thought gets in the way, how our own thinking, how our own content of our head fills up the space long before anything else happens. Could you speak to that?
Could you just say that slightly?
Yes, certainly. Okay, yeah. To create context, we'll say, what is the thinking, what is thought, what is that whole experience that happens in our own heads getting in the way?
Getting in the way. Yeah. So, 3 principles: mind, consciousness, and thought. Mind is a formless energy that has a deeper intelligence. Thought is the thought activity that starts the moment we're born, goes until we die, and consciousness is is allowing you to feel every thought that you have. So this is the human experience. The problem is we get pulled into the illusion that something other than thought in the moment is putting feelings in us. So as soon as we lose sight of the fact of thought creating feeling in the moment, it creates insecurity, because it looks to the brain like if to a child her best friend saying something mean can make her upset, then so can the teacher and the weather and the dog and the homework. So because our brains are designed to bring us back to a state of equilibrium, if we point them in a false direction, that something outside of us puts feelings in us, our brains will start to spin, okay? And that since we feel every one of our thoughts, we'll feel every spinning thought in that. So stress will become anxiety, fear, and eventually, if that goes on too long, it becomes depression. So because most people don't know this, we innocently go through life, and I know it looked to me like, wow, I wonder why there were periods where I was so happy or my mind was so clear for an extended period of time, like maybe part or most of a year when I lived abroad, or on a shorter trip, or in a relationship. I think we all, before we get introduced to these principles, we wonder, like, what was that? And we search and we search and we search. And if you're in America, you go to a psychotherapist, people go to astrologers, they go everywhere trying to find that magic. Because when we're in that state of mind, we know we're home. But all that it is that our minds are present at those times, and our minds settle into the present when we're not firing them up with thought. And we have the capacity to fire up our minds with thought in very healthy ways, like using our data-based computer part of our brain to pull up information. And then if we let the mind settle back into the present after that, then there's no problem. We're following nature's design for what I call optimal psychological functioning. Being active and then resting. And because we're allowing our minds to fall back into that connection with our larger minds, we're also staying connected to an inbuilt system, when to use your mind and when to let it rest. So that's the best case scenario. But what happens for so many people, Billy, is we imprint on the thought patterns of the people around us. And many of the people around us keep that database going way beyond when it should, right? And habits like that start to run in the unconscious. Or we might have a parent who's a worrier. And as a child, it looks to us like that's how you address problems. So you start to teach your brain to worry. And then you forget that you ever did that. And that habit starts to run in your unconscious. And because we feel whatever we think, when that worry habit fires up, it looks to us like we're in a worrisome world. Or when that over-analytical part of our brain fires up, it looks to us like it makes sense to be thinking overtime. But because these are misuses of the brain, you can think about the brain like like a car. Like if you use it improperly, red lights will start to flash on the dashboard. And what people learn with this understanding is that the red light is feelings of stress and distress. That's nature's GPS system that has been built into us to know when we're in a misperception about how life works. And when you realize that, Billy, and you remember you're feeling your thoughts in that very moment, most people's minds will settle themselves back into the here and now, and the unnecessary thinking will clear, and then you're in a go forward position with life once again.
Yeah, I in my conversations with people, and because it's so obvious and it's never thought about, I would say to people, perhaps one of the greatest gifts that humanity has ever been presented with is the ability to self-orientate, the ability to self-correct when we see through whatever drama is, that melodrama is, that thought storm that we create. You bring up that analogy or metaphor of the red lights, the feeling of stress, of anxiety, as a warning system. I'd very much love to hear what you have to say about, the interpretation of feeling, the thought feeling connection. I see behind you, you have Keith and Valda's single paradigm, which points this out so clearly and so beautifully. I'd love to hear your take on the single paradigm and on that interpretation of the feeling, as it were, for the red light.
Yes. Well, for many years, probably 17 years, I taught the principles without this realization of the single paradigm that they reveal. And I helped many, many people, Billy, but I found that was always a problem for people when they lost what 3P teachers call the feeling, right? So we get in a beautiful feeling when we get in touch with the principles. And I think that's partly because we're getting in touch with our true nature. And when we are in touch with the patterns that give rise to life, it calms us down because we're connecting with our true nature and with the spiritual dimension of life. But inevitably, you will get into the illusion that something that's not thought is causing a feeling, because that's the human experience all day long. Because thought is lightning quick, and it doesn't come with any kind of a cue card saying, this is your thoughts you're feeling. If my daughter speaks disrespectfully to me and I feel disrespected, in a nanosecond, it looks like her words put feelings of disrespect in me. I don't see the thought, how can she be so disrespectful? Because it's so fast and it's invisible, right? So we're in that, getting pulled into that illusion off and on all day long, in the same way that once you learn to balance with gravity, once you learn to walk as a toddler, you lose your balance after that off and on all day long. We all do. But it's built into human beings to instinctively reach, to rebalance with these pre-existing principles that nature has given us. So with physical balance, it's gravity. And when we lose our balance, we instinctively bring ourselves back into alignment with gravity. With our psychological, spiritual lives, the loss of balance is what happens when we get pulled into the illusion that something that's not feeling is that's something that's not thought is causing our feelings. That's what the single paradigm has revealed. It's given people a map so that when they get pulled into that illusion, they can find themselves more quickly and remember, oh, I've forgotten that it's thought creating these feelings in the moment. You see, before I was introduced to the single paradigm by Keith and Valda, I didn't know why I was getting lost. And I didn't know why all my clients were getting lost. And in listening to the other teachers who were, started when I did or a little before, it didn't sound really like they had a logical explanation either. Usually the explanation is you need to get more deeply in touch with the principles, which was something most people try to do over and over. But at a certain point, it's like, well, how much more deeply do I need to understand these principles, right? So I just find that it's a map that makes clear the dynamic of what the three principles are about and how they play out in our life experience. And that it's raised the impact on myself and on my clients enormously.
Also, me too.
You too. And I have to say, Billy, it's made me less focused on being in a beautiful feeling because I live there so much more of the time, but more insight prone than I was before thinking about this as a paradigm. But my insights are much less about me and my personal world. They're much more about the spiritual nature of life. Because when you see the principles through the lens of the single paradigm, you're able to engage the principles to clean up these unconscious thought patterns so much more often and so much more efficiently that the personal becomes less and less important. You have less personal stuff going on. So what is left? This beautiful spiritual world that's giving rise to our experience as human beings.
Mm.
So my insights are much more of a spiritual nature now.
Isn't that very interesting? Because all by itself it happens, with the dissolution of the illusions, of all of these anxieties, of the sources of them. One of the things that I would often speak about, especially with new people that come to the principles or coaches that are starting to absorb the sin words into their practice, is that there is no feeling that they should be feeling.
Right.
That at times you are going to feel up or down or in or out or whatever way, and you're going to be tossed on the waves every now and then, but that doesn't make them wrong. And this desire to want to chase a beautiful feeling all the time itself becomes that red herring, because the thought of the chase is what's keeping you from it. And I find that allowing whatever is unfolding in the moment, and what the principles taught me was, this is how my experience is unfolding right now.
Yeah.
Regardless of what it is, this is exactly what's unfolding right now.
Yeah.
And that innate, that innate trust in understanding that whatever is going on right now, when what those feelings are telling me, like you say, the dashboard is setting me off. It's maybe time to maybe just step back a little bit. And like you say, there are times, like you say, when you feel disrespected by your kids, and in lightning quick time, it looks to you like it's coming from your daughter. And what that informed me was that we'll respond to the feeling all the time, unless we know differently. And to recognize that the feeling is a reflection of whatever belief, stroke thought that's playing out in our head right now, the belief of respect, or I know she should be respecting me, or whatever, becomes deeply informative. And like you say, with the single paradigm, either your feelings are coming from your thinking or they're not, even when it doesn't look like it.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, like you, it became a very simple roadmap to dismantling a huge amount of the language that started to crop up with the principles, because we're now talking about something that didn't have a distinct and clear language.
Mm-hmm.
Like you say, the narrative. So I find that so many different teachers, so many different people have different interpretations of the truth, like we were saying earlier on. And one of the things that you and I have come across in different occasions is learning how to listen.
Yes.
And how powerful it is to learn how to listen. And it takes us back to that conversation about the train. I'd love to hear your understanding on that, the art of listening.
Thank you. That's such a beautiful question. Sid Banks would often say, when you went to one of his meetings, we had the public ones once a year, and then when I worked for Pransky and Associates, he would meet with us as a staff from time to time, which was lovely. But he would say, don't listen to my words, listen for the feeling. And I did find that when I listened for the feeling, of course, Sid Banks came from such a deep and beautiful feeling, it would just lift your consciousness so that you were hearing where his truth was coming from. And when you find that place in yourself, Billy, you get on the train to your own world of wisdom and insight. So, I find that I tee up all of my trainings and often coaching when I'm starting with someone I talk with them about listening. And, in our culture, and I think one of the gifts of this global tragedy, COVID-19, this pandemic, has been slowing down, everybody's slowing down. And, but generally, particularly with Americans, we're multitaskers and we've trained our brains to just jump, 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 jump. And so your listening is chopping up the information that you're getting, and you're just looking for little content bites. You can't learn the principles that way. So I start with a training on listening.
So true.
Yeah. So I will invite people to just let that listening, if they notice their minds are jumping around when I'm speaking, to just gently ask your mind to settle down. You can think of it as like an abused dog. You don't want to yell at it for jumping around. You want to gently ask it to settle down, because you've trained it to jump around. Now you're inviting it to just return to its true nature. And that I will often say to people, especially when I'm doing trainings, because again, the way we're educated is to take in data and immediately compare it with stuff we've already learned. Well, you can't learn the principles that way. Just like you couldn't learn to balance with gravity if you were thinking about, like, let's say you're trying to learn to walk, but you're thinking about skateboarding. You have to have you have to listen with big ears, or wide angle listening, so that you get it experientially. So I'll ask people to suspend the comparing during the training so that they have an experience of what I'm teaching, and then later they'll have something to compare their previous information to, because they'll have an experience. And so I encourage people in different ways to tune into the feeling. I'll often ask people, do you like music? People will usually say yes. Listen to me the way you would listen to music. And remarkably, just learning to listen in that way, the mind returns to its normal state of presence as a baseline. You can talk to people about listen to life that way when you're not with me. Yeah.
You brought up something that really, it just, when it clicked, when you were talking about listening, about how we have trained ourselves to chop up the information and operate on sound bites and quick chunks of it as we're processing data all the time. And sometimes, like, when we have these conversations or people are starting to slow down, and you get the, but sure, that's okay for you. You get it, or, there's a difference between me and them. And I like you say, I won't say it pains, but it becomes very obvious then as part of the conversation to say, all you were talking about is something that you learned. This is not something that I was given and somebody else wasn't given. This is what we are talking about, this deeper underlying sense, and this baseline of presence and peace is every human being's birthright, period. And what's, like you say, we train ourselves not to hear presently. We train ourselves not to listen to that feeling. We train ourselves because we're so busy parsing the information.
Yeah.
And it becomes a learned thing.
Yeah, true.
And it's so easy then to, in the process of all that learning, to forget the baseline.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, the habit of thought, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so powerful. Yeah. And when you think we have 1 to 200,000 thoughts a day, and so many of them are entrained into these habits, it's really, I always think of my coaching as a training program in a way to help people untrain themselves from these habits. But one of the things that keeps this so fresh, Billy, is I never know how long it will take someone. Usually I'll say, 8 sessions if you're relatively, not struggling badly, right? But for some, could be a year. And for some who are struggling badly, it could be 2 sessions, I mean, really, I had a woman who could barely get off the couch with depression. I think it was after her 3rd session, she said, "Don't call me, I'll call you." She was fine,
Yeah.
And I think in her case, it hadn't been that long. It had been a couple years, and before that, she was very intact psychologically. So this just, it just reconnected her with her intact innate mental and spiritual health. And she was like, "I'll see you." Even I was shocked. And I've seen a lot of miracles with this work. Yeah.
Isn't that marvelous? That this isn't a timeline thing. This is not a linear thing.
No. And that keeps you in awe. It keeps you in that state of awe. 3P practitioners and coaches, it never gets stale with us, because because if you're watching what's happening, you have to be in a state of awe, and and it's obvious that it's not you. I've become a facilitator or a channel, if you will, for something so much bigger than me that I am so grateful for. And God knows I could never bring about what the principles bring about. I mean, that's very clear. So you stay in a state of awe and wonderment and gratitude. And I guess it doesn't really get better than that.
And nor is it tiring.
Right. Not tiring.
It's not tiring. Sometimes people would say to me, "But how can you continue to have these conversations? Do you not get tired from them, or or it becomes exhausting?" And I never find that.
No.
Because I find, and this is, I suppose, going back to the point about the deep listening. For me, deep listening means that I just go really quiet on the inside myself.
There you go.
And is there anything more refreshing?
No.
I mean, it's what meditation and mindfulness and all of these things want to point you to.
That's
But
right.
but that's about doing something. This is just about being something. Just about being quiet.
That's right.
And when we naturally just drop into that silence, it's so self-soothing.
Yes.
And I can sit there for hours and do this. You have conversation after conversation after conversation with people.
I know.
Because for me, it's equally as refreshing.
Yes, it's true.
And when we have those moments, and you refer to it, it's as we refer to as the aha moment.
Yeah.
When you can just see the light going on in somebody's eyes.
Yeah.
And isn't that just marvelous?
Oh, there's nothing more, I don't think, more satisfying or fulfilling.
This isn't, this lends itself to it is, when they're discussed as the universal principles, it has to be universal because it's the same for absolutely every single human being without exception on the planet.
Yeah. Yeah, I never get any pushback on that from people. I don't know if it's because I'm so at ease with it, but once you say it, I mean, I always say to people, check it out in your own experience. See if you can think an angry thought and have a loving feeling, and now ask yourself, is anyone in China able to have an angry thought and a loving feeling? Like, just check it out. And it's so obvious that this is true 100% of the time for every human being in every situation.
And it's learned. Most of it is all learned into the system, and it can be so easily unlearned.
Yes.
It can be. People a lot of times don't realize that addiction is a habit of thought. Yes. Compulsion is a habit of thought. A lot of it is just a habit of thought, and then trying to abate that feeling that arises with the habit, reacting to the feeling of the habit, essentially.
Yeah.
And the logic of it is so simple. The moment it lands.
Yeah.
It's such a giving thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Annika, it's hard to believe that 5 minutes have just evaporated.
Wow.
I confess, every time as these conversations go on, they get deeper and they're beautiful. and so full of wisdom. And I am so unbelievably grateful that you took your time out of your day to join us today.
Well, I'm grateful too, Billy. Thank you for what you do. I'm sure you're getting this out to many people who wouldn't know about it otherwise. And I deeply appreciate you for that.
Absolutely. And again, before you go, and I'll see you on the other side to everybody else. And before we go, Annika, if they want to find you, how would they find you?
Oh, yeah. So my website is annikahurwitt.com. And my email is Annika, ANNIKA, @annikahurwitt.com.
Simple as that.
There you go.
There you go. So for anybody that would like to reach out to Annika in any way, either like you say, you get her through her email her. For everybody else, thank you so much for joining us. Tomorrow morning, I have the Belgian psychologist and disruptor Bart Lewis on tomorrow morning. A wonderful man, has an incredible story, and again, another leader in this particular field, works with leaders across industry and again, relationships and stuff. And I'm so looking forward to hearing Bart speak about this and about this understanding. For everybody, thank you all so much for joining us. I look forward to joining you all again tomorrow. In the meantime, be at peace. Annika, I'll see you on the other side. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.